I am Hannah Wilson, 30 years old, and standing in the corner of an upscale steakhouse watching my world collapse. My father just announced at his retirement party that my brother James would inherit everything. Looking right at me, he added, "My daughter, she might get a job at Wendy's if she is lucky." The room tensed as James sneered. She would screw that up too. Just as tears threatened our family lawyer, Thomas stood up unexpectedly and reached for the microphone. "Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and stick around to see what happened next when the lawyer cleared his throat." Growing up as Gerald Wilson's daughter meant living with impossible standards. Our family owned Wilson Manufacturing, a company my grandfather started that now employed over 300 people across 3 states. From my earliest memories, our family dinners revolved around business, talk market trends, and expansion plans. While other kids had bedtime stories, I had profit margin reports. My brother James was 5 years older, and clearly the golden child from day one. Dad would ruffle his hair proudly whenever James showed the slightest interest in the business. "That is my successor, right there," he would announce to dinner guests, while I sat quietly invisible despite my straight-A report cards and genuine curiosity about the family company. My mother Catherine tried in her way to balance things, but she had long ago accepted her role as the supportive wife who never challenged Gerald directly. "Your father just wants what is best for the company," she would whisper when finding me crying after another dismissive comment from Dad. "He loves you in his own way." That love never felt like much. When I was 12, I created a detailed presentation about how our company could expand into eco-friendly packaging. I had researched for weeks, made colorful charts, and practiced my delivery. Dad glanced at it for 30 seconds before saying, "Cute Project Hannah. Now let the men talk business," before turning to discuss a much simpler suggestion from James. Despite the constant rejection, something in me refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe a desire to finally earn his approval, or maybe just genuine passion for the business my grandfather built. Whatever the reason, I worked twice as hard through high school, took business classes, and eventually earned my MBA from Northwestern with honors. James, meanwhile, scraped through a business degree at our local state university, partying his way through 5 years before Dad secured him a vice president position at Wilson Manufacturing. He showed up late to meetings, delegated most of his work, and spent company money on lavish client entertainment that rarely resulted in actual contracts. After graduate school, I practically begged for a position at the company. Dad reluctantly placed me in marketing, far from any decision-making role. "We will see if you can handle even this," he said, as if my academic achievements meant nothing. Within 6 months, I doubled our social media engagement and landed our products in a major retail chain, bringing in over $2 million in new revenue. The company newsletter praised the deal, but somehow never mentioned my name. When I brought it up, Dad said, "The team effort paid off. No need to seek individual credit." That same month, James lost a $500,000 client due to a missed deadline, yet suffered no consequences. When I pointed out the double standard, my father exploded. "This company has supported generations of Wilsons, and you have the nerve to question how I run it. You think a few marketing tricks compare to the real business decisions your brother makes." Mom pulled me aside afterward. "Hannah, you know how your father is. Just do your work quietly. Things will get better." But things never did. Year after year, I watched James fail upward while my accomplishments were minimized or attributed to others. Last year, I developed a complete rebranding strategy that modernized our image and appealed to younger consumers. The board loved it, and several members approached me privately to commend my vision. Dad sat silently during my presentation, then later told a business associate loud enough for me to hear. "We hired some consultants who came up with a decent marketing plan. Always good to get outside perspective." Those consultants did not exist. It was entirely my work. Meanwhile, James made increasingly questionable decisions. He hired friends for positions they were not qualified for, and pushed through an expensive software system that employees struggled to use and ultimately abandoned. He treated long-term employees disrespectfully, and spent excessive amounts on business trips that seemed more like vacations. 3 months ago, I overheard our financial controller, Martha, discussing discrepancies in expense reports with our lawyer, Thomas. They quickly changed the subject when they noticed me, but Martha later hinted that not everything is as it seems with the company finances. When I pressed for details, she just shook her head and said, "Your father handles things his own way." Despite everything, I still hoped that Dad would eventually recognize my contributions. When he announced his retirement, something in me foolishly believed this might be the moment he would acknowledge my dedication and talent. Maybe, just maybe, he would include me in the succession plan alongside James. As the date of his retirement party approached, I bought a new dress, prepared thoughtful remarks in case I was asked to speak, and even drafted some innovative ideas for the company future that respected our tradition while embracing necessary changes. I knew better, yet I still hoped. That hope made the devastation at the retirement party all the more crushing. The party was held at Morton's Steakhouse in their private dining room, with dark wood paneling and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of old money and tradition. Nearly 100 guests filled the space. Family members, long-term employees, business associates, and friends who had watched the Wilson empire grow over the decades. Crystal glasses clinked as waiters circulated with champagne, and the rich aroma of prime steaks wafted from the kitchen. I arrived 30 minutes early to help with last-minute arrangements, smoothing the embroidered napkins and adjusting the floral centerpieces of white roses and blue hydrangeas. My stomach twisted with anxiety, but I maintained a professional smile as guests began to arrive. Hannah called Martha, our financial controller, who had been with the company for 22 years. She pulled me into a warm hug. "That color is beautiful on you." "Thank you," I said, smoothing the navy blue dress I had splurged on for the occasion. "Everything looks perfect, right?" Martha nodded, but something in her expression seemed guarded. "Yes, everything is as planned." She squeezed my arm gently. "You know how much your work has meant to all of us, right? The marketing team raves about your leadership." Before I could respond, my Uncle Robert approached. "There is my favorite niece, ready for the big night." His enthusiasm seemed forced, and he quickly changed the subject to the weather forecast. As the room filled, I noticed Thomas, our family lawyer, huddled near the bar with a portfolio of documents, checking his phone repeatedly. He caught my eye and gave a curt nod before stepping outside to take a call. Thomas had always been professional but distant, a shrewd man in his 50s who had handled our family legal matters for over 15 years. Dad made his entrance like a politician, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with practiced charm. At 65, Gerald Wilson still commanded attention with his tall frame and confident stance. His silver hair and tailored suit projected success and authority, and people gravitated toward him naturally. 40 years building this company to what it is today, I overheard him tell a group of admirers, but the next generation is ready to take it even further. His gaze drifted past me as if I were invisible, landing on James, who stood surrounded by his own circle of supporters. My brother looked every bit the heir apparent in his expensive suit, laughing too loudly at his own jokes. At 35, James had our father's height, but none of his disciplined physique, his frame softened by years of expense account meals and minimal physical effort. Going to roll out a complete modernization plan, James announced to anyone who would listen. New markets, aggressive expansion. The old man played it too safe these past few years. I bit my tongue, knowing James had opposed every innovation I had proposed over the past 3 years. His idea of modernization was flashier business cards and larger expense accounts. Susan from accounting approached me with a sympathetic smile. "Hannah, I just wanted to tell you how much everyone appreciated that vendor management system you implemented last quarter. It saved my team about 20 hours each week." "I am glad it helped," I said, warmed by the recognition. "I have some ideas about streamlining the inventory tracking system too, if there is interest." "There definitely is," Susan said, lowering her voice. "Though you might want to wait until things settle after tonight." Her cryptic comment increased my unease, but before I could ask for clarification, my mother appeared at my side. Catherine Wilson was elegantly dressed, as always, her pearls and subtle makeup projecting the refined image she had cultivated over decades as a business leader's wife. "Hannah, darling," she said, kissing my cheek, "you look lovely. Have you spoken with your father yet?" He seems busy, I replied, watching Dad laugh with a group of board members. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, it is his night. Just remember that your father does what he thinks is best for everyone. Her words felt like a warning, increasing my sense of foreboding. Across the room, I noticed Thomas had returned, now deep in conversation with Martha. Both looked serious occasionally, glancing toward my father and brother. A server approached to announce dinner would be served in 15 minutes. As guests began finding their assigned tables, I discovered I was seated at the family table, but noticeably far from my father, positioned between my mother and a distant cousin. James, of course, sat at Dad's right hand. Just before we sat down, I overheard a conversation between two board members that made my blood run cold. Complete reorganization from what I hear, the older man murmured. Gerald has it all planned out. Clean transition of power. The daughter will be reassigned, probably for the best, given the circumstances. They noticed me and abruptly changed the subject, but their words confirmed my worst fears. Whatever was coming, it would not be good for me. As we took our seats and the appetizers arrived, the knot in my stomach tightened to the point that I could barely touch my shrimp cocktail. James dominated the table conversation, outlining grandiose plans for company expansion, while Dad nodded approvingly. Not once did either of them ask for my input, or even acknowledge my presence beyond passing the breadbasket. I searched the room for allies and found Martha watching me with concern. Next to her, Thomas was reviewing something on his tablet, his expression unreadable. Something was definitely happening beneath the surface of this carefully orchestrated event. When the main course arrived, Dad clinked his glass for attention. Before we enjoy these magnificent steaks, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. The official speeches will come with dessert, but I just want to say how proud I am to see so many faces who have been part of the Wilson Manufacturing family for years, even decades. Applause filled the room, and Dad basked in the adulation. I clapped mechanically, trying to quiet the voice in my head that kept saying, "You do not matter to him. You never have." As we ate, I made polite conversation with my cousin while acutely aware of the important discussions happening just seats away from me. My father leaned close to James, speaking intensely about something that made both men glance in my direction before quickly looking away. Whatever bomb was about to drop, I was completely unprepared for how public and devastating it would be. After the plates were cleared and coffee was served alongside slices of cheesecake, my father stood up and moved to the small podium at the front of the room. The murmur of conversation faded as everyone turned their attention to Gerald Wilson, the man of the hour. Friends, family, colleagues, he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the room. Tonight marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. 40 years ago, I joined my father in the family business, and together we built Wilson Manufacturing into what it is today. Dad spoke warmly about my grandfather's vision, the challenges they had overcome together, and the pride he felt watching the company grow from a small regional operation to a respected industry leader. He thanked long-term employees by name, acknowledging their contributions with specific anecdotes that showed his detailed knowledge of the business. "Martha, 30 years keeping our finances straight," he said, raising his glass to our controller. "Thomas, 15 years of legal guidance that kept us out of trouble more times than I can count." The lawyer nodded slightly, his expression neutral, as he continued reviewing documents at his table. My father continued talking about industry changes, technological advancements, and how the company had adapted over the decades. He was charming, articulate, and completely in his element as he held the room's attention. "But no man can stand at the helm forever," he said, his tone becoming more solemn. "The time has come for me to step aside and enjoy some fishing while I still have the strength to reel in the big ones." Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. My heartbeat quickened as he approached the topic of succession. Despite everything, a tiny flame of hope still flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, he would acknowledge my contributions alongside James. Maybe the years of dedication would finally be recognized. The question of who takes over is the most important decision any business leader makes, Dad continued. You need someone with vision, someone who understands the company DNA. someone who can lead us into the future while honoring our past. He paused, surveying the room with satisfaction. Fortunately, I have been blessed with a son who embodies all these qualities and more. James has worked alongside me for 15 years, learning every aspect of the business. He has my complete confidence and the full support of our board of directors. My father gestured for James to join him at the podium. My brother rose with a self-satisfied smile, straightening his tie as he strode forward to stand beside our father. The two men, so similar in appearance and bearing, presented a powerful image of succession and continuity. Effective next Monday, James Wilson will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer of Wilson Manufacturing with full authority to lead this company into its next chapter. Applause broke out, and James waved magnanimously as if accepting a political nomination. I clapped automatically, my face frozen in a polite smile that took all my strength to maintain. I had expected this, of course, but the public coronation still stung. But my father was not finished. He raised a hand to quiet the applause, and what came next shattered any remaining composure I had. Now I know some of you might be wondering about my daughter Hannah. All eyes turned toward me, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Hannah has been with our marketing department for a few years now, and while she has tried her best, I think we all know that the Wilson business acumen skipped a generation there. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. I sat perfectly still, unable to believe what I was hearing. So what happens to Hannah? Dad continued, as if discussing a piece of furniture rather than his daughter. Well, James will be making some organizational changes, streamlining departments that have not performed to expectations. His gaze fixed on me, cold and dismissive. My son gets the business. My daughter, she might get a job at Wendy's if she is lucky. The business world is not for everyone, after all. The room went deadly quiet. I felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked away, leaving me struggling to breathe. My mother gripped my hand under the table, but kept her eyes down, unwilling to challenge her husband publicly. James snickered into the microphone, adding the final twist of the knife. She would screw that up too. More uncomfortable laughter, though noticeably less enthusiastic. A few guests looked away, embarrassed by the public humiliation. Others watched with the morbid fascination of witnessing a car crash. I sat perfectly still, my body numb but my mind racing chaotically. 30 years of memories flashed through my consciousness. Every dismissal, every ignored achievement, every moment I had tried to earn the approval that would never come. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me as I struggled to maintain my composure. My throat burned with unshed tears, and my stomach churned violently. The taste of bile rose in my mouth, and I gripped my water glass so tightly I feared it might shatter in my hand. But I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Dad continued talking about his retirement plans, the fishing trips, the vacation home in Florida, the consulting work he would still do for the company. James stood beside him, already looking every inch, the CEO nodding seriously at appropriate moments while occasionally smirking in my direction. Across the room, Martha looked stricken, her hand covering her mouth in shock. A few long-term employees who had worked with me directly were exchanging concerned glances, but no one spoke up. No one challenged the Wilson patriarchy. I considered standing up and walking out, making a dignified exit rather than enduring more humiliation. But something kept me rooted to my chair, perhaps pride, perhaps shock, or perhaps some instinct that told me to wait. Because at that moment, Thomas the lawyer closed his portfolio with a decisive snap and rose to his feet, his expression unreadable as he approached the podium where my father and brother stood. Thomas Bennett had been our family lawyer for 15 years. A tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he typically blended into the background at company events. He was known for his thoroughness and discretion, qualities my father had often praised when introducing him to business associates. Now, Thomas cleared his throat loudly enough to interrupt my father mid-sentence. "Gerald," he said, his voice firm but professional, "I believe there are some matters that need clarification before you continue." My father looked annoyed at the interruption. "Thomas, we can handle any paperwork tomorrow. Tonight is for celebration." I am afraid this cannot wait, Thomas replied, reaching for the microphone. As legal counsel for Wilson Manufacturing, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure all parties are fully informed. The room grew silent again, a new tension filling the air. James shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a nervous glance with our father. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas began adjusting his glasses. While this is indeed a celebration of Gerald Wilson's impressive career, there are legal matters regarding the company's succession that must be addressed. My father tried to reclaim the microphone. Thomas, this is hardly the time or place. On the contrary, Thomas continued, smoothly maintaining control of the podium. This is precisely the time and place, since you have chosen to make public statements about company leadership that are not entirely accurate. A murmur swept through the crowd. I sat up straighter, my heartbeat accelerating. Whatever was happening, it was completely unexpected. As many of you know, Wilson Manufacturing was founded by Harold Wilson, but what fewer people remember is that Harold had a partner in the early days, Edward Chambers. My grandfather's business partner had been like an uncle to me as a child. Uncle Eddie, as I called him, had no children of his own and had always shown special interest in my school projects, and later my business ideas. He had passed away 5 years ago. Edward Chambers sold his interest in the company to Harold Wilson, with specific provisions, Thomas continued. One of those provisions, which was renewed in each subsequent company charter, was that leadership succession would be based on merit and contribution, not merely bloodline. Thomas removed a document from his portfolio. Edward Chambers was also Hannah Wilson's godfather, and he took that role very seriously. Before his passing, he asked me to ensure that when the time came for succession, his goddaughter would be evaluated fairly based on her contributions to the company. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is preposterous. I am the majority shareholder, and I decide. Actually, Gerald Thomas interrupted, your majority status is contingent upon adherence to the company charter, which you signed and reaffirmed when you became CEO. Section 12 specifically states that succession must include consideration of all qualified family members, with evaluation by the board based on documented contribution and merit. Thomas turned to face the assembled guests directly. Over the past 3 years, I have been quietly documenting the contributions of both James and Hannah Wilson to this company, as was my duty under Edward Chambers' directive. He produced another folder. These records show that Hannah Wilson has been directly responsible for 3 major client acquisitions, a successful rebranding that increased market share by 14%, and cost-saving measures in her department that improved profitability by 22%. Stunned silence filled the room. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Someone had actually been paying attention to my work all this time. By contrast, Thomas continued relentlessly. I have also documented numerous instances of mismanagement under James Wilson's supervision, including the failed CRM implementation that cost the company $800,000, consistent budget overruns in his department, and most seriously irregularities in expense reporting that warrant further investigation. James lurched forward. You have no right, Dad. Are you going to let him? Thomas raised a hand. I have not only the right, but the obligation. Furthermore, at Edward Chambers' instruction, I commissioned an independent audit of company operations 6 months ago. He turned to where Martha sat. Our financial controller was aware of this audit, though, bound by confidentiality until tonight. Martha nodded, looking both relieved and apprehensive. The audit results are enlightening, Thomas said, his tone remaining professional despite the bombshell he was dropping. They reveal that departments under Hannah Wilson's direction have consistently outperformed projections, while those under James Wilson's leadership have underperformed by an average of 30%. My father attempted to interject again, but Thomas was unmovable. Most concerning, the audit uncovered evidence that James Wilson has been using company funds for personal expenses, misrepresenting client entertainment costs, and in one instance creating a shell vendor that billed the company for services never rendered. Gasps erupted around the room. James's face had gone from red to ashen. That is a lie, he shouted. but his voice lacked conviction. "The documentation is extensive and has been verified by 2 independent accountants," Thomas replied calmly. "The board will receive full copies tomorrow morning." He turned to look directly at me for the first time. According to the provisions established by Edward Chambers and incorporated into the company charter, Hannah Wilson has not only earned consideration for leadership, but has demonstrated superior qualification for the role based on documented performance. The room erupted in confused conversation. Board members huddled together, employees exchanged shocked glances, and family members looked between my father James and me with expressions ranging from confusion to vindication. My father gripped the edge of the podium, looking as if he might collapse. This cannot be right. I built this company. I decide its future." "You built it on the foundation," your father and Edward Chambers established Thomas, corrected gently but firmly. "And you are bound by the legal framework they created, which you yourself affirmed multiple times over the years." He addressed the room again. "The board of directors will need to convene officially to review all documentation and make succession determinations in accordance with the company charter. Until then, no statements about future leadership should be considered final." Thomas nodded respectfully to the stunned guests. "Thank you for your attention. I apologize for the interruption, but as legal counsel for Wilson Manufacturing, I am obligated to ensure all proceedings adhere to established legal requirements." He stepped away from the podium, leaving my father and brother standing there in shocked silence. The room buzzed with conversation as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to fully comprehend the dramatic reversal that had just occurred. After years of invisibility, my work had not only been seen, but documented and validated. After years of dismissal, someone had believed in me enough to create safeguards, ensuring I would be treated fairly. Uncle Eddie. My godfather had been looking out for me all along, even after his death. As the implications began to sink in, I noticed Thomas approaching my table. He leaned down and spoke quietly. "Your godfather was very proud of you, Hannah. He always said you had the true Wilson business sense, just like your grandfather. He made me promise to make sure you got your fair chance when the time came." Tears welled in my eyes, but for once they were not tears of hurt or frustration. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Thomas straightened and nodded professionally. "The board meeting is scheduled for 9 tomorrow morning. I suggest you prepare your thoughts on company direction. You have earned your seat at that table." As he walked away, I noticed my father and brother huddled in intense conversation, occasionally shooting furious glances in my direction. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in my professional life, I was no longer invisible. The elegant retirement party disintegrated into chaos within minutes. Board members clustered in corners, speaking in urgent whispers. Long-term employees looked torn between shock and validation, many of them casting supportive glances my way. My mother sat beside me, pale and silent, her social graces finally overwhelmed by the public exposure of our family dysfunction. Dad and James huddled with 2 board members, who had always been their strongest allies, gesturing angrily toward Thomas, who stood calmly reviewing documents with Martha nearby. "This is nothing but a legal technicality," I overheard my father say. "We can challenge it. The board still answers to me." One of the board members, an older man named Richard, who had been my grandfather's friend, shook his head slowly. "Gerald, if what Thomas says is true about the audit findings, we have fiduciary obligations to consider. Potential misuse of company funds is serious." James pounded his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. A few accounting errors are being blown completely out of proportion." Several guests began making discreet exits, murmuring awkward congratulations to my father while avoiding eye contact. The celebratory atmosphere had evaporated, completely replaced by the tense discomfort of witnessing a family and business in crisis. I remained seated, still processing everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to slip away quietly and collect my thoughts before the inevitable confrontation. But another part, a stronger part that had been silenced for too long, knew this was the moment to stand my ground. My thoughts were interrupted when James stormed over to my table, his face contorted with rage. "What did you do?" he demanded, looming over me. Who have you been talking to behind our backs? I stood up slowly, refusing to be physically intimidated. I did nothing but my job, James. The job I have done exceptionally well despite being undermined at every turn. This is all some kind of setup, he snarled. You and that lawyer cooked this up together. There is no way your mediocre marketing stunts compare to my contributions. Susan from accounting had approached and now spoke up unexpectedly. Actually, James Hanna's marketing stunts brought in the Westfield contract that saved our third quarter last year. What exactly was your major contribution during that time? James turned on her. Stay out of this. This is family business. It is company business, corrected Richard, who had followed James over. And as a board member, I am very interested in these audit findings Thomas mentioned. My father appeared, his expression thunderous. This entire situation is being misrepresented. Thomas has overstepped his authority. There will be consequences. What exactly is being misrepresented, Dad? I asked, finding a calm, steady voice I hardly recognized as my own. The audit results, my contributions to the company, or just the fact that James is not the business genius you have convinced yourself he is. The nearby conversations quieted as people turned to watch our confrontation. Dad glared at me with cold fury. You have always been jealous of your brother's position in this company. Now you are trying to use legal trickery to steal what you have not earned. Not earned. My voice rose slightly despite my efforts to remain composed. I have an MBA from Northwestern. I have brought in millions in new business. I have modernized our entire marketing approach while James was charging personal vacations to the company credit card. What exactly have I not earned? Martha stepped forward, clutching a tablet. Mr. Wilson, everything in the audit is documented with evidence. The shell company that James created, Pacific Consulting Group, billed us over $300,000 last year for services never rendered. The money was traced to an account that James controls. James's face went pale. That was a legitimate business expense for market research. Market research that produced no reports, no data, and no results. Martha challenged her years of deference, finally giving way to professional integrity. The audit team found emails where you instructed the accounting department to process these payments without the normal verification procedures. More employees had gathered around us, forming a loose circle. I noticed with surprise that many of them were standing closer to me than to my father and brother, a subtle but significant shift in the room's power dynamics. Hanna has been the one actually running much of the day-to-day business, while James takes credit, said Michael from operations, a 20-year company veteran. We all know it, but nobody says anything because she is Gerald's daughter, and that is how it has always been. This is insubordination, my father growled. I will not have employees undermining leadership decisions. It is not your decision anymore, Gerald Thomas said, rejoining the conversation. The company charter is very clear. The board must evaluate succession based on merit and documented contribution. Your personal preference does not override that legal requirement. My father turned on Thomas with naked hostility. You have been our lawyer for 15 years. Your loyalty should be to me, not some outdated clause my father and Eddie put in the charter. My loyalty is to Wilson Manufacturing and its legal governance structure, Thomas replied evenly. Edward Chambers was very clear about his wishes, and I am honoring my professional obligation to him and to this company. The confrontation had now drawn almost everyone still remaining at the party. Even the restaurant staff hovered uncertainly at the edges of the room, unsure whether to intervene. I took a deep breath and addressed my father directly. Dad, for 30 years I have tried to earn your approval. I have worked harder, studied more, and contributed more than you have ever been willing to see. And still tonight you stood up in front of everyone we know and dismissed me as worthless. My voice remained steady, though emotion threatened to overwhelm me. You said I might be lucky to get a job at Wendy's. You laughed when James said I would screw that up too. After everything I have done for this company, that is how little you think of me. A few people in the crowd murmured in agreement. My father seemed taken aback by the public challenge, so accustomed to unquestioned authority that he appeared genuinely confused by the shifting sentiment in the room. You have always been too sensitive, he deflected. Business requires tough skin. If you cannot handle a little joke. It was not a joke, I interrupted. It was the same dismissal and humiliation you have subjected me to my entire life. The difference is that tonight there are witnesses and consequences. I gestured toward Thomas and the documents he held. The audit does not lie, Dad. The numbers do not lie. I have earned my place in this company through actual results, while James has coasted on your favoritism and apparently engaged in financial misconduct along the way. James lunged forward suddenly. You ungrateful little... That is enough. The sharp command came from my mother, who had finally found her voice. She stepped between James and me, her normally placid expression replaced by fierce determination. I have stood by for years watching this family tear itself apart, and I will not allow it to continue. She turned to my father. Gerald, you have been blind to Hannah's talents because you decided long ago that only a son could carry on your legacy. You have been blind to James's failings because you saw in him what you wanted to see, not what was actually there. Mom reached for my hand. Our daughter deserves better than what you gave her tonight. And this company deserves leadership, based on ability, not gender or birth order. The room fell silent at my mother's unprecedented rebellion. My father stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Richard cleared his throat. I believe we should adjourn this celebration and reconvene tomorrow morning for a proper board meeting, 9 a.m. sharp, as Thomas suggested. All relevant parties should be prepared to review the audit findings and discuss succession planning in accordance with company bylaws. He looked at me directly. Hannah, we would like you to prepare a brief presentation on your vision for the company's future. James, you should be prepared to address the financial irregularities identified in the audit. My father started to object, but Richard held up his hand. Gerald, you built a great company, and no one is diminishing that achievement. But the time has come to ensure its future success through proper governance and accountability. With that, the confrontation reached its anticlimactic conclusion. People began dispersing, some offering awkward goodbyes, others approaching me quietly with words of support or expressions of long-suppressed respect. My father and James left without speaking to me, their rigid postures radiating fury and indignation. My mother squeezed my hand before following them, whispering, I am proud of you. I should have said that years ago. As the room emptied, I found myself standing with Thomas and Martha, both of whom had championed my cause when I did not even know I had allies. I have a lot of preparation to do before tomorrow, I said, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. Martha smiled. The numbers are on your side, Hannah. They always have been. Thomas nodded in agreement. Edward Chambers always said you were the future of this company. Tomorrow the board will see what he saw in you all along. As I gathered my things to leave, I realized that whatever happened next, something fundamental had changed. The invisible chains of family expectation and gender discrimination that had held me back for years had been broken, not by my own strength alone, but by the quiet support of those who had seen my worth when my own father could not. The Wilson Manufacturing headquarters occupied a red brick building downtown with the company logo, a stylized W in navy blue, mounted prominently above the entrance. I had walked through those doors thousands of times, but never with the mixture of determination and nervous energy I felt the morning after the disastrous retirement party. I arrived 45 minutes early, dressed in my most professional charcoal gray suit, carrying a portfolio containing my presentation and supporting documents. The security guard greeted me with unusual deference, suggesting that news of the previous night's revelations had already spread throughout the company. The boardroom occupied the top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, surrounded by 14 leather chairs. I was the first to arrive, and I took a seat midway down the table, not at the head where my father always sat, but not at the far end where I had been relegated in previous meetings. Thomas arrived next, nodding approvingly at my chosen position. I have distributed copies of the audit summary to all board members, he said. The detailed findings are available if requested. Martha followed shortly after, bringing coffee and offering me an encouraging smile. "Whatever happens today, you have already won by standing your ground," she said quietly. Board members began arriving in twos and threes, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Richard, my grandfather's old friend, made a point of greeting me warmly. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, patting my shoulder before taking his seat. James arrived 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, accompanied by two men I recognized as attorneys from a prominent local firm. He looked as if he had not slept, his usual polished appearance undermined by dark circles under his eyes and a slightly rumpled shirt. He avoided looking in my direction. My father entered last precisely at 9, with my mother surprisingly at his side. Dad looked every inch the corporate patriarch, his expression stony and determined. Mom caught my eye briefly and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. Richard called the emergency board meeting to order, establishing that with 11 of 14 board members present, they had a quorum to conduct business. Given the unusual circumstances, Richard began, "I suggest we first review the audit findings that came to light at last night's event, then discuss the succession planning requirements under our company charter, and finally hear brief presentations from both James and Hannah Wilson regarding their qualifications and vision." My father immediately objected. "This entire proceeding is premature and possibly invalid. As CEO and majority shareholder, your status as majority shareholder is actually what is at issue here," Gerald Thomas interrupted, opening a folder of documents. "According to Section 17 of the company charter, your controlling interest is contingent upon adherence to the governance procedures established by the founders." Thomas distributed copies of the relevant charter sections. "If the board determines that these procedures have been violated, particularly regarding nepotism and merit-based succession, your shares revert to standard voting shares without controlling interest privileges." This was news even to me. The room fell silent as board members reviewed the documents, many of them clearly seeing these provisions for the first time. "Edward Chambers was quite thorough in establishing protections against exactly this situation," Thomas explained. "He and your father, Harold Wilson, built in safeguards to ensure the company would always be led by the most qualified family member, not simply the oldest male heir, as was common practice at the time." Richard cleared his throat. "Let's proceed with the audit review first, shall we, Martha? Would you please summarize the key findings?" Martha stood and presented a clinical, factual overview of the financial audit, using slides to illustrate the performance disparities between departments. Marketing under my leadership had consistently exceeded targets while reducing costs. Several departments under James's supervision had underperformed while exceeding budgets. Most damaging were the detailed records of financial improprieties, personal expenses, charged to the company, the shell consulting firm that funneled company money to James's personal accounts, and evidence that he had altered financial reports to conceal these activities. James's attorneys attempted to interrupt several times, but Richard firmly maintained order. When Martha finished, James was given an opportunity to respond. "These allegations are greatly exaggerated," he insisted, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Any accounting irregularities were simple oversights or administrative errors, not intentional misconduct. As for departmental, performance marketing inherently has different metrics than operations or supply chain management." His defense sounded hollow even to my ears, and the board members' expressions suggested they felt the same. James concluded with a weak appeal to tradition. "Our father has always intended for me to lead this company. The Wilson name and legacy." "The Wilson legacy includes integrity and merit," Richard interrupted. "Hannah, would you like to present your perspective now?" I stood and distributed copies of my presentation. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my vision for Wilson Manufacturing's future, not with grandiose promises or vague concepts, but with specific data-driven strategies built on our company's strengths while addressing its weaknesses. I proposed a phased modernization of our production facilities' expansion into eco-friendly product lines that research showed would open new markets, and a management restructuring that would recognize and reward performance at all levels. Wilson Manufacturing has thrived for 3 generations, because it adapted to changing markets while maintaining core values of quality and innovation, I concluded. I believe I have demonstrated both the business acumen and ethical leadership necessary to guide this company into its next chapter. The board discussion that followed was intense but remarkably fair. Several members who had previously deferred to my father now asked pointed questions about James's conduct and my qualifications. Others expressed concern about family conflict disrupting business operations. After nearly 2 hours of deliberation, Richard called for a series of votes. The first determined that the audit findings were credible and warranted further investigation potentially, including legal consequences for financial misconduct. James's face went ashen at this, while his attorneys scribbled furious notes. The second vote acknowledged that the succession process had not followed charter requirements for merit-based consideration of all qualified family members. This effectively suspended my father's controlling interest privileges as Thomas had outlined. The final and most consequential vote concerned interim leadership while a complete investigation was conducted. The board voted 8-3 to establish a co-leadership arrangement. I would oversee operations, marketing, and product development, while James would remain involved but with significantly reduced authority and under financial supervision. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during most of the proceedings, finally spoke. This company has been my life's work. To see it handled this way, to have my judgment questioned. Gerald Richards said gently, "No one disputes your contributions to Wilson Manufacturing, but the evidence clearly shows that Hannah has earned her place in company leadership, while serious questions exist about James's conduct and judgment." "A daughter taking over a manufacturing company," my father muttered, shaking his head. "My father would never have allowed it." Actually, Thomas interjected. Harold Wilson specifically approved the charter provisions, ensuring leadership would be based on merit, not gender. And Edward Chambers, who knew Hannah from childhood, clearly anticipated she might someday be the most qualified leader for this company. The meeting concluded with specific directives. I would assume co-leadership responsibilities immediately. James would retain his title, but with oversight from the financial department and board. A complete investigation of the financial irregularities would proceed with results determining whether legal action would be required. As people began gathering their materials to leave, my father approached me. His expression was complex, anger mixed with confusion, and perhaps a hint of something else. "You won this round," he said stiffly, "but running this company is harder than you realize." I met his gaze steadily. "I have been effectively running large parts of it for years, Dad. The difference is now I will get the credit for my work." He had no response to that, turning away to join my mother, who waited by the door. She gave me a small, sad smile before they left together. James stormed out without speaking to anyone, his attorneys trailing behind. Several board members approached to congratulate me, including Richard, who seemed genuinely pleased with the outcome. "Your grandfather believed that talent sometimes skips a generation," he told me. "I think he would say it landed exactly where it belongs." The days that followed brought significant changes. I moved into a proper executive office near my father's, though he rarely came in now, ostensibly focusing on his retirement. James maintained a sullen presence, his previous swagger replaced by careful compliance with the new financial oversight procedures. I immediately began implementing some of the strategies I had outlined to the board. We formed a product development team to explore eco-friendly packaging options. I restructured reporting lines to recognize talented employees who had been overlooked. Most importantly, I established transparent performance metrics for all departments, eliminating the favoritism that had protected underperforming managers. Some of my father's loyal executives resisted initially challenging my decisions or slow-walking implementation. I met this resistance not with anger but with data and clear expectations, gradually earning, if not their enthusiasm, then at least their compliance. Other employees embraced the changes with relief and growing optimism. Martha became an invaluable ally, helping me understand the complex financial structures my father had created over decades. Thomas provided guidance on legal and governance matters, helping me navigate the formal requirements of my new role. Within weeks, the atmosphere at Wilson Manufacturing had noticeably shifted. Meeting discussions became more open and collaborative. Employees who had previously remained silent began offering innovative ideas. Productivity increased across departments as people recognized that contribution, not connection, would determine advancement. The investigation into James's financial misconduct proceeded methodically. When presented with the mounting evidence, he ultimately agreed to repay misappropriated funds and accept reduced responsibilities rather than face potential criminal charges. His reputation was damaged, but he retained a position with the company, albeit under close supervision. My father watched these developments from a distance, his initial fury gradually giving way to grudging acceptance. He occasionally offered advice when asked, sometimes valuable insights from his decades of experience, though always delivered with the implication that I would inevitably falter without his guidance. But I did not falter. Within 3 months, our new eco-friendly packaging line had secured 2 major contracts. Our operational efficiency had improved measurably under the new management structure, and most telling employee satisfaction scores had risen, significantly reflected in reduced turnover and increased applications for open positions. The company was not just surviving the leadership transition, it was thriving because of it. 6 months after the fateful retirement party, Wilson Manufacturing celebrated its most profitable quarter in 5 years. We held a company-wide lunch in the manufacturing facility, with production temporarily halted so all employees could attend. Standing on a small platform overlooking tables of workers enjoying catered barbecue, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with finally earning my father's approval. These results belong to everyone in this room, I told the assembled employees. From the newest hire on the production line to our most experienced engineers, every one of you contributed to this success through your ideas, your effort, and your willingness to embrace change. The applause felt genuine, a stark contrast to the strained corporate events of the past, where employees clapped dutifully for announcements they had no part in shaping. The company culture had transformed gradually, but profoundly. We had implemented a profit-sharing program that distributed bonuses based on company performance rather than executive discretion. We had created cross-departmental innovation teams that brought together employees from different areas to solve challenges collaboratively. Most importantly, we had established transparent communication about company goals, challenges, and performance. James had found an unexpected niche in client relations, where his charisma could be an asset while keeping him away from financial controls. Our relationship remained strained but professional. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of resentment in his eyes, but more often a reluctant recognition that the company was functioning better under the new structure. My father's adjustment proved more complicated. After initially keeping his distance, he began visiting the office weekly, ostensibly to check on things, but increasingly to offer genuine, if gruffly delivered, advice. Our interactions remained formal at first, marked by his difficulty in acknowledging the validity of my leadership. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a crisis. A major supplier suddenly went bankrupt, threatening production delays that could cost us a crucial contract. Dad happened to be visiting when I received the news. "What are your options?" he asked, simply not rushing to take over or criticize. I outlined 3 potential solutions, including redirecting materials from less urgent products and negotiating with an alternative supplier despite higher costs. He nodded thoughtfully. "The supplier negotiation is your best bet. Want me to make some calls? Jim Reynolds at North Star owes me a favor." We worked side by side for hours, leveraging his long-established relationships while implementing my crisis management protocol. By day's end, we had secured the materials needed to fulfill our obligations with minimal disruption. As we sat in my office afterward, exhausted but satisfied, Dad studied me with an expression I had rarely seen directed my way, something approaching respect. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Better than I might have, actually. Your approach with the production team was effective." The words clearly cost him something to say, and I recognized the effort behind them. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I learned a lot watching you handle crises over the years." A small bridge had been built that day. Not a complete reconciliation, but a foundation for something new. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer seeking his approval, but accepting his contribution as a valued advisor, rather than an infallible authority. My mother observed this evolution with quiet satisfaction. Over lunch one day, she confessed, "I always saw your potential, Hannah. I just never found the courage to challenge your father's blindness to it. That is my greatest regret." "You stood up when it mattered most," I reminded her, recalling her intervention at the retirement party. That took courage after all those years. Family dinners gradually resumed, awkward at first, but slowly finding a new equilibrium. James participated sporadically, still uncomfortable with the altered family hierarchy, but making efforts to adapt. We were not the picture-perfect family portrayed in corporate newsletters, but we were learning to interact with greater honesty and less toxic competition. Outside the family circle, I found unexpected healing through mentorship. I established a leadership development program that identified promising employees regardless of background or department. Watching these individuals grow and contribute brought a fulfillment that parental approval never had. Martha, approaching retirement herself, became both mentor and friend. "What happened to you was wrong," she told me over coffee one morning. "But how you responded to it has changed this company for the better. That is a rare kind of victory." Thomas remained a trusted advisor, though our interactions became less frequent as the initial legal challenges resolved. "Edward Chambers would be proud," he said during our last formal meeting. "Not just of your business success, but of how you have maintained your integrity throughout." The personal transformation proved as significant as the professional one. The constant anxiety of seeking approval I would never receive had lifted, replaced by confidence built on demonstrated capability and earned respect. I no longer measured my worth through my father's eyes, but through the tangible impact of my work and the genuine relationships I had built. 6 months turned into a year. We expanded into new markets, modernized production facilities, and implemented sustainability practices that positioned us ahead of industry trends. Employee retention improved dramatically, and we became known as a company that valued contribution over connections. Dad continued his gradual evolution, from critic to occasional collaborator. During a rare moment of reflection, he admitted, "I was wrong about you, Hannah. I was so convinced business leadership looked a certain way, like me, like James, that I could not see the different but equally effective approach you bring." The admission was not a dramatic reconciliation scene from a movie, just a quiet acknowledgement between two professionals who happened to be father and daughter. It did not erase decades of dismissal, but it offered a path forward based on mutual respect rather than perpetual disappointment. The most profound lesson from the entire experience was learning the difference between seeking validation and creating value. For years, I had desperately worked to earn recognition from someone incapable of giving it. The freedom came not from finally receiving that approval, but from realizing my worth existed independently of it. I discovered that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from moving through it with integrity. The public humiliation that once seemed unbearable had become the catalyst for growth and authentic empowerment. By facing my deepest fear, public rejection by my own father, I had found a resilience I never knew I possessed. The company continues to evolve, as does our family. Neither is perfect, but both are healthier than they were before that fateful retirement party, when a father's cruel dismissal and a lawyer's unexpected intervention changed everything. I no longer need my father to see my value. I create that value every day through my work and relationships, and ironically, it was only when I stopped needing his approval that he finally began to offer it. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it seemed like everyone was against you? Comment below with your story of finding strength in difficult moments. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your own path. And remember to share with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to claim your own value, even when those closest to you may not recognize it yet.